The stars kind of aligned for today's video to happen. The story of how we got here is long enough and detailed enough that it could be its own video. To keep it short, though, it started with me buying an ON30440 off of a channel member. I delayed the shipment though because that channel member runs a shop and they were planning to release an ON30 kit soon. I told them to wait until that was released so that I could save on shipping. Well, I lost track of time and didn't follow up for a month or two. The only reason I really remembered was because I needed something 3D printed for a different upcoming project. As I was looking around to find a good 3D printing service, I then remembered they had a printer, remembered they had an engine kit I wanted, and an engine on hold for me, so I went back to finalize our deal. In the midst of our meddling, he just said, "Hey, you want me to throw in some extra stuff for free so you have more projects to work on?" And that's how we wound up here. Which I guess means this qualifies as a sponsored video? But he forgot to ask for an ad read. You can find a link in the description to his shop, though. If I'm being honest, while he does have his store, I think a major reason Dave gave this to me was just to get me hooked on one of his favorite scales. Dave is a fan of the channel after all, and while he does do ON30, his shop is filled to the brim with OO9 for a reason. Those kits aren't just made for sale. Dave has his own addiction to satiate. And I think he hopes to kickstart one in me. Why do I think this? Well, when he reached out with the offer, I really had only two specific OO9 locomotives from his shop that I really wanted. I'm not a British guy. So I told him to send me a handful of random ones from a pile of leftovers he had from a recent train show. I was expecting, like, maybe 2 locomotive shells. He sent me 8 extra shells. And one of those locomotives isn't even a kit of his design. It's one that he had to pay money to print since he needed to buy the files off of somebody else. Whatever the case though, this is a lot of kits. And boy howdy, let me tell you, we are going to have a field day today. Though, of course, I only have so much time to make each video. So today, let's paint 3 shells. The large falcon, the War Department Hunslet, and the Festy Fairlie. To start the large falcon, I used a coat of Citadel color Macrogee blue atop the tank, thinned with a little bit of water. The thinned paint meant it took a few coats to get it to look consistent across the whole tank, but it also meant more details were more visible. Notably, this helped with rivets. Next, I did something kinda stupid. I don't think I've ever seen a British locomotive with anything other than a black smoke box, but I painted mine in grey at first. Eventually I changed it to black, but it took me a while to fix. Speaking of black, I used Badger Monoflex engine black along the running board. For the front and rear of the engine, I used Badger Monoflex Dark Tuscan Oxide Red, an all-time favorite of mine. Now that I'm watching the footage back, I wonder if I should have gone for a more vibrant color of red. I'm not fully sure on that though, so let me know what you think in the comments. Oh, and I also gave the roof a coat of red. As I painted on another coat of blue for the tank, I decided to add some blue to the pistons. And you know what? This is a good time to mention something kind of ironic. This is the same blue that Dave used on his sample large falcon on the store page. Now, Dave did give me some color suggestions for when I went to buy more Citadel paints, but this is one of the ones I just happened to have lying around from the get-go. So there's a bit of a funny coincidence there where he personally recommended the color, I didn't know this, and I used it anyways, but I also specifically used this color on this engine to avoid copying somebody else too much. I'll explain that in a minute. For the tram skirting and cab sides, I painted on a desaturated navy blue. I rather liked this color for the tram skirting, but quickly realized it was not the right pick for the cab, and I wound up instead using the same blue as the tank. For the cab steps, I added some more red to help highlight them. And I also decided to paint these, wheel covers, I guess? I don't know the technical term. Whatever they are, I also gave them the red treatment. At this point, the engine was looking fairly complete, aside from the grey smoke box, but I wanted to add a touch of style to this engine, and I was particularly inspired by the work of a subscriber, that being Trainman's submission for our last community showcase. I just love the blue and gold on this engine, and I thought it would be fun to try my hand at something similar. However, the only engine I was really excited to paint out of the box was the War Department Hunslet. Sure, it's not an identical engine, but it's a very similar side tank. In order to make sure I didn't subconsciously copy them by going back and looking at the photo too much, I banned myself from viewing the original until I had done my own, and I went for a different style of locomotive to give me a different shape to try and add the gold lining to. Ironically, that decision is what resulted in me using the exact same color as the store sample for this engine. Not that I think that's a bad thing, it's just a cosmic, comical coincidence. Anyways, I used a Citadel color Retributor armor for the gold striping on the tanks, the windows, the whistle, and the edge of the running board. Now, eventually I swapped a bit of the gold on the top of the boiler for Citadel color Grey Knight steel instead, but I didn't record that part because I added it a few weeks after recording and finishing most of this project. Next, I superglued on the cab roof, which I repainted in black at some point, I don't quite remember when though. And finally I repainted the smoke box to be black. And voila! We have ourselves... actually wait. Let's repaint our other engines before we spend too much time on the results. Since I had just finished the large Falcon when I started the War Department Hunslet, the mistake of the smoke box was fresh on my mind, and I started by painting the smoke box on this one. Once again, I used Badger Modelflex engine black, and I also used it on the boiler and the tram skirts. Next, I started using an apple barrel paint for the main color on this locomotive. And, well, it was a little bit too inconsistent. I like the color, but it just didn't stick very well. It admittedly doesn't help that I rarely use primer, but I wound up stripping the paint and using Badger Modelflex Southern Sylvan Green instead. Honestly, the Sylvan Green didn't turn out the best, but the color was way easier to work with, and you really need to look for the mistakes to notice them. Overall, I painted the tanks, the cab, and the pistons in this green. Next, I used a Citadel color Retributor armor for the whistle and pop valves, the boiler bands, and the smokestack cap. Off camera, I also added some gold to the windows and the tank steps. After that, I added some Badger Modelflex Dark Tuscan Oxide Red in the same spots as the large Falcon. And I just realized I forgot to explain something with the tank stripes of the large Falcon. Ah well, I did the same trick here, so I might as well explain it now, right? In order to paint on nice straight stripes of color, I used Tamiya 10mm masking tape to mask off the parts that I didn't want the paint to show on. My experience with this tape on this project was a little bit mixed, though. On the large Falcon, it worked like a charm, and I don't think I had to touch up any blemishes. But on this War Department Hunslet, the paint leaked under the tape a lot, and I wound up touching up about half of what I painted on. I wonder if that's something to do with the surface, or maybe the paints I was using, but whatever the case, it was a nice thing to do, even when it didn't work on the Hunslet. And, for a finishing touch, I added some real coal to the locomotive bunker. Man, we're knocking out these things pretty fast. That's the War Department Hunslet done, so let's move on to the Festy Fairlie. The Festy Fairlie is quite an interesting design because it uses a wildly different mechanism compared to the rest of the locomotives that I have. While most of the engines that Dave sells on Double M Pro use the Kato 11109 mechanism, this one uses the Kato 11105. The 109 is a simple four-wheeled mechanism, while the 105 is a two-truck mechanism. Wait, sorry, two bogies. We are British today, after all, governor. The reason for the different choice of mechanism on this engine is because Fairlies, like the one this particular shell is trying to represent, have drivers that are separately articulated. To quote Wikipedia, the majority of diesel and electric locomotives in the world follow the basic form of the Fairlie, two power trucks with all axles driven. Since this is a steam locomotive, however, it makes for quite a fascinating locomotive, especially with its double smokestack design that really makes it look like it has two separate boilers, even though they're one and the same. Anyways, as I've been showing off in the background, I did have to cut off the coupler boxes on the Kato 11105 to make the shell fit. There are some separate piston covers that need to sit on the bogies so they can articulate with the bogies. The coupler boxes get in the way. For this engine, I went with Citadel Color Screamer Pink as my choice of main tone. I was tempted to do another green, honestly, but with how many engines I have from this sponsorship, I think it'd be a shame to not give each one a mildly unique color scheme. This time around, I used a different shade of black for the smokebox, smokestack, and cab roof. Or, well, I guess smokeboxes and smokestacks? For how cool this engine is, I'm never gonna get used to that as an American. Anyways, the color I used was Citadel Color Abaddon Black. Once that had a little time to dry, I then painted on boiler bands and smokestack caps using Citadel Color Retributor Armor once more. I also did the cab windows off camera. While I do like giving my engines unique features, I also kind of like trying to tie them together with some similar themes, you know? Make them feel like they're all part of the same family, so to say. Next, I added some Citadel Color Grey Knight's Steel to, are these air pumps? Are they decorative? I don't know what these are, but I added the color as a trim to these cylinders beside the smoke boxes. I also added some to the smokebox door hinges, a bit to the cab door and side windows, and a stripe running around the base of the engine below the tanks. For the ends of the engine, I once again used Badger Modelflex Dark Tuscan Oxide Red, and the tram skirting I painted in black. To finish off this locomotive, I added some green to the coal bunkers. However, I changed my mind midway through and decided to instead use Macragee Blue. Honestly, I think the green was slightly better, but I do like how the blue turned out regardless. I then glued on some coal off camera, and with that, I have a new addiction. Thanks, Dave. In all seriousness, I quite enjoyed painting these. There weren't any fancy parts or crazy assemblies, allowing me to focus on the paint jobs. And the fidelity of these kits were rather nice. I didn't notice the print lines until I started editing down this footage, and that's zoomed in, close-up shots. I do have one gripe with these kits, however. They have an inconsistent grip on their mechanism. The War Department Hunslet had an iron grip on its mechanism, and I had no troubles with it, but the other two were kind of rough. With the Festy Fairlie, it kind of makes sense. It's a weird mechanism with a weird fitting. But for the large Falcon, as soon as you tried to pick it up, that thing's mechanism never stayed put. I'm not sure if this was an issue with the kit's design, or if it was a misprint issue. Whatever the case, a little bit of glue would easily fix this problem. I'm just lazy. Would I recommend these kits? Yeah, I would. It's kind of hard to fully judge since I don't do OO9, I do ON30, but my gut says the price and quality is good. The price could admittedly be a little better, but is still within the range of good, in my opinion. Plus, assembling these things was quite straightforward, and there's plenty of room for a little fun with a paint job. If you'd like one of these for yourself, you can find a link to all three of the kits that I've built today in the description. Thank you to Dave for the free samples, and screw you, Dave, for the new addiction. Anyways, thank you for watching. Cheers, folks.